Hello, everyone, and welcome to our State of AgeTech webinar. I'm Karen Etkin. I run the General Technologist and the AgeTech Academy, and we offer online content and education about AgeTech. I am incredibly excited to be here with all of you today. And this webinar is being recorded, so you don't have to take any notes or screenshots. We've got you covered. We'll send the recording after Zoom is done processing it. As always, we've got here on the team the one and only Neil Miral. We have a Q&A box at the top of the Zoom panel, so if you have any questions, feel free to post them and we will get to them. We have a segment at the end for Q&A. Today, we are going to discuss, first of all, the state of the current AgeTech ecosystem, where it's at and where it might be going in the near future. We'll talk about the trends and opportunities in this space. And we also have some interesting occurrences from the past year that are worth discussing in terms of funding for AgeTech startups, new grants that are available for startups, and also government incentives. We have some fairly interesting news from different parts of the world. Ready or not, we are getting started. Before we dive in, I like to start by discussing what AgeTech even means and how I like to define it, just to make sure that we are all on the same page here. So I like to define AgeTech as technology that is not only designed to tackle the challenges of aging, but also it is by including older adults in the design process. And that part, in my personal belief, is a critical part of the definition. So I don't believe you can create a fantastic AgeTech product that people actually want to welcome into their lives if you're not including your target audience, which is older adults and family caregivers and elder care professionals, in the design process. And so we've got some adjacent industries to AgeTech that people sometimes mistake for being all AgeTech is. So when I go out into the world and I tell people, hey, I'm a gerontologist and I work in tech and I'm at part of this ecosystem called the AgeTech ecosystem, people sometimes assume that it's just about accessibility or just about digital health, when the reality is there is a lot of white space in the middle, which is dedicated to helping people live their best life during their third or fourth act. Now, this year's AgeTech market map included almost 300 startups. I think that was like the biggest market map so far. And when I looked at how much funding AgeTech startups raised, how much these particular startups have raised so far, that was close to $4 billion in equity funding. So it doesn't include debt funding. It's just equity funding, close to $4 billion, which is a lot. We often get this feeling that this ecosystem is a niche ecosystem. And I'm not saying that it's as big as cyber security or digital health, but this is a growing ecosystem and it is gaining traction. It is gaining attention from the public and it's gaining attention from investors. And so we're definitely going in the right direction. And when I looked at which startups have raised the largest amounts of funding, you wouldn't be surprised to find startups like Papa and Honor and Alaya Care on that list. Surprisingly, there's only one hardware startup, just VR. And it's also interesting to note that Honor from the US and SarahCare from the UK, which are two startups which have a lot of commonalities. They're basically both tech-enabled home care, and they basically both raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and they both acquired large home care chains or franchises in order to really become a significant player in this space. So it's really interesting that we have two startups, both sides of the pond, who have a very similar strategy towards conquering this market and disrupting this market, because that's what you get when you are a unicorn and you are disrupting a traditional industry with technology. Now, when we look at the funding, generally speaking, funding for startups in 2023 was rough. 2023 was a rough year for startups in general. We saw suddenly there was no more 0% interest rates. Suddenly money was no longer free. And so startups suffered as a result. And we saw startups either struggle to raise funding or startups who had to shut down altogether. And in 2024, things have started to pick up again. And we didn't see, there are still layoffs in tech, but we didn't see as much of it as we did in previous years. And so far, we're only halfway through 2024. And it's also worth noting that startups sometimes announce funding rounds weeks, if not months, after they actually happened. So far, startups in this ecosystem have raised almost $250 million, which is not too bad, because considering the fact that most of these startups didn't actually have to raise funding this year. Some of them still have runway from previous years where they've raised significant amounts of funding. So far, so good. We're almost, I think we're almost at the levels of the entire year of 2023. This is the silver lining. Looks like we're getting out of the difficulty fundraising of 2023. It's also worth noting that there is more funding available for AgeTech startups this year, more so than ever before. And so we have new funds that were launched last year. And we also have funds that have raised the second or third fund. And when we look at the landscape of funds that invest in early stage startups, we see that there is funding out there that wasn't available to AgeTech startup 5 or 10 years ago. Funds like AgeTech Capital and Magnify and Longevity Venture Partners, they are fairly new. And we've also got the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation, which is receiving funding from the Canadian government that has renewed its funding for 3 additional years, and a new initiative called Envisage, which is a collaboration between MedTech and AgeWell. They also received funding from Canada's government. So overall, if startups want funding to get off the ground, or they want to get into programs that will help them get off the ground, that is available to you in most parts of the world. And if your startup is not located in a geography where this funding is available, sometimes you can open up a site or collaborate with the local organization to access some of that funding. On top of these new funds or renewed funds, we already have existing funds like Third Act Ventures and Ziegler Linkage, which have been running for several years, providing much needed funding for startups in this ecosystem. And of course, there are also generalist funds who provide funding for AgeTech startups. A lot of the digital health funds, you'll see them investing in AgeTech startups. And some completely generalist funds, you see them publish sort of investment thesis on why they think this startup ecosystem is worth looking into. And we've seen Bloom VC from India publish a very interesting investment thesis a few weeks ago. And we've seen Cowboy Ventures publish an article about this ecosystem. So we see that it's not only gaining traction, but also generating interest. Another avenue for funding that isn't limited to AgeTech startup, but it is funding for experienced entrepreneurs who are launching a business later in their career, is Second Bloom Angel Network. So what Second Bloom Angel Network has found, it should be common knowledge by now, is that the average age of a successful founder is actually 45. However, when you look at VC funding, more often than not, it will go towards funding founders in their 30s. So very young founders, when the data shows that older founders are actually more successful. And so that is the premise upon which Second Bloom Angel Network has started. And I assume some of you have already known about them, but if you don't, and if you are a more experienced founder, I highly encourage you to check it out. Grant funding. We love grant funding. Everyone loves non-dilutive funding. And we also see that starting to pick up. So we've got funding from like government research grants that have been around for decades. They're not new. But we also have foundations like Mods Ventures, which I learned about recently, which offers up to $50,000 for funding innovative ideas in dementia care. And you can also be a nonprofit or an individual to access this grant funding. So it doesn't have to be a for-profit company, which is also a fairly new development, which I'm all for. We also have government funding from the NIA or NIH, which is ongoing. The A2 Pilot Awards is now at its 5th and final year. We've got startup resources that are funded by the Canadian government from Envisage, the Envisage Network, and from the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation in Canada. And both of these organizations have a call for proposal. So I encourage you, if you're a Canadian startup, to follow up and sign up for their mailing list just to make sure that you're not missing any deadlines. In the UK, there's the Longitude Prize on Dementia, which is a significant amount of funding. Again, government grants, non-dilutive. And you've got also research grants from the UKRI. This one is currently open for applications. If you are developing novel tools and technology to enable people to live independently with dementia, check out this grant. You can apply for up to £2 million. Your project can be up to £2 million. So that is great. I hope you are keeping your spirits up when you hear about all this amazing funding that's available to your startups. And I want to make you even happier because I recently looked at the revenue from some of the AgeTech startups who are included on the AgeTech market map. So Crunchbase has an estimated revenue column for when we look at the list of AgeTech startups. And their estimation is that most of the startups have between 1 million to 10 million of annual revenue, which is actually pretty great. When you look at startups in general, there are not so many startups who live long enough to reach that phase when they are making annual revenue of $10 million or up to $10 million. And that's pretty great. We also have startups making more than that, up to 500 million, but that is really the top 2%. And when we surveyed our audience and we launched a survey last year from the German technologist, the numbers were slightly different. My hypothesis is that because we have in our survey respondents, we had more earlier stage startups. So we only had about 16% in the 1 to 10 million annual revenue bracket. Most of the startups were either pre-revenue or under 1 million. But still, then when we look at it from the ecosystem perspective, and when we look at Crunchbase data, the numbers are pretty good. And now, what we do see year over year is that there is more and more incentive from governments that is directed towards this ecosystem. So some of these government incentives come in the form of government grants and research grants, which is great. But what we've seen from Australia recently has been even more interesting. So a couple of years ago, the Royal Commission into Aged Care Quality and Safety published its report. And they basically said that the Australian government should invest more money in technology in the elder care space. Fast forward to May of 2024, the treasurer in its budget, in the Australian budget, has actually allocated more than $1 billion, Australian dollars, to technology to improve the elder care, the infrastructure of technology in elder care, which is really phenomenal. We already know that, first of all, one of the barriers for tech adoption has been just lack of infrastructure, lack of internet access. And we also know that the elder care space in general has been slower than other industries to go through the digital transformation that our entire society and our entire world has been going through over the past few years. And so that is fantastic news coming out of Australia, and hopefully it will push forward and not just the Australian AgeTech ecosystem, but also other ecosystems from Asia Pacific who will look into Australia as a potentially next market that they want to expand into. Across the lake in the United States, however, we see that there are some hiccups. So I don't know how many of you remember the Aging Connected report, which was published way back in 2021. Basically, what this report has found is that there are about 22 million Americans over the age of 65 with no high-speed internet in their home. So that was 42% of older Americans in the wealthiest country in the world. They didn't have access to high-speed internet at home. So there were initiatives launched to connect everyone in America, because when this report, and I assume other surveys as well, when they looked into the reasons why so many older Americans didn't have access to high-speed internet, they found that it was either not available where they live, so the infrastructure wasn't there, or they couldn't afford it. So there were some initiatives who launched during those years to connect America. But what the FCC commissioner found also fairly recently, this month, that was about a week ago, they found that despite a significant investment, billions of dollars, they didn't really manage to connect. This title says anyone. I have to take it at face value. They didn't actually manage to connect anyone, despite investing billions of dollars. And we already know, we've known for years, that high-speed internet is basic infrastructure that is required for living in modern society. And we know that it impacts, when we look at like the social determinants of health, having access to internet is part of that as well. And so I'm hoping that by next year, when we have this briefing in mid-2025, we will have great success and we will have everyone in rural areas, at least in developed countries, connected to the high-speed internet. And we'll just see if that happens. I really hope that it will. Now, one report that I always like to read each and every year and I look forward to is the AARP's report on tech adoption and the 50 plus. And when this year's report published, I was excited also. And what was even more exciting than the fact that this report published is the fact that they found that 50-plus-year-old Americans use most devices or own most devices at the same rate as younger Americans. And 50-plus-year-old Americans now own an average of 7 devices. They have at least one primary device, which typically will be their smartphone or their desktop computer. And they use most of the devices they own, they use them on a daily basis. That I feel like is a major push towards not just tech adoption, but enabling startups to use these devices as a platform, because many of the startups in our ecosystem are software startups. So they need someone else to make the hardware and to put the hardware in people's hands. And so that is a great step in the right direction. And also, if your smartphone is your primary device, then you're not necessarily relying on Wi-Fi infrastructure. You could be using a data plan that hopefully is at least 4G, if not 5G. Now, it is important to understand that when we look at sort of the technology adoption curve, most older adults would not define themselves as early adopters. In fact, only about 11% of the 50 plus will define themselves as early adopters. And more than 20% will wait and see where the technology goes before they adopt it. And the reality is that most older adults still don't feel that technology today is designed for them. So we've known this for years, that we need to do a better job at designing technology with and for older adults. And that is primarily the reason why I like to look at the definition of AgeTech as technology that is designed with and for older adults. And when we look at tech spending, we see that even when people are cutting back because the economic realities for many people mean that they are living on a fixed income and the cost of living is just growing year over year, we see that even despite these economic realities, people are still spending hundreds of dollars each year on tech devices. I highly encourage you to look at this report. It's the AARP's Tech Trends and the 50 Plus report for 2024. And they always bring fresh insights and they survey thousands of 50-plus-year-old people. So this is a report that I highly recommend everyone to check out every year. Now, when it comes to AI, everyone is always wondering, what are we going to do, or what is currently being done with generative AI in our space? And for those of you who aren't familiar with this term, generative AI is basically artificial intelligence that is able to create new stuff. So it can create text, it can create images, it can create videos, it can create music. A lot of the stuff that was previously assumed computers would never be able to do because it requires human creativity, we have learned that AI can actually do, and it can actually do pretty good. And there are 3 startups that I wanted to highlight that are using generative AI in their products, either existing products or new products. So first of all would be Curvocacy, which is a startup that offers tech training and education to older adults. They are now offering Apo, which is an AI tech tutor to their learners. So you go into class, you learn something, and then when you get back home, if you have questions, you can chat with Apo and ask them, hey, how do I do this? How do I do that? I forgot. They said something in class. What is this new term that I have stumbled upon? I want to learn it before I go into next week's class. So that is one startup that is utilizing generative AI for tech training and education, which is brilliant. Another startup is Intuition Robotics, which is the maker of LQ, the robot that I had the honor and the privilege of participating in building. So when you create conversational products, or in the past, when you created conversational products, you had to script everything, right? You had to think in advance what types of conversations or what types of phrases or what types of intents your user could say to you. And it doesn't mean if it's a voice activated device or a chatbot, which is just based on text. You had to think about everything in advance and script it in advance and build this persona or character for your robot or chatbot. Now, startups like Intuition Robotics or startups like GrandPad, which is also utilizing this technology, they can now use generative AI to basically make conversations more engaging and to make their chatbots or robots have limitless conversational options, which is quite exciting. And because it means that potentially, if you're having a conversation with your virtual companion, you would never get bored, because potentially, in theory, it would never repeat itself. No matter how many times you prompt it to tell you a joke, it will have a limitless and endless amount of jokes that it could tell you. So that is a pretty exciting use for generative AI. I'm sure there are plenty other startups who are using Gen AI in the back end and without necessarily releasing a press release about it. And if your startup is doing it and you want to tell everyone about it, feel free to write it in the chat box. I am sure many of us are excited to hear what you're working on. And now for the opportunities. So when we look at the global trends in aging or technology, or generally speaking in our society, and the global trends that impact AgeTech or aging, we see that there are several trends that offer opportunities for AgeTech startups or for people in aging in general. So one thing it would be the aging of Asian countries. So when we look at the demographic trend, we see that there are some Asian countries which are ahead of the curve. Japan, first and foremost. So one of the things that Japan has been doing to deal with the caregiver crisis that they have, which is really challenging because they typically don't allow immigrant workers to come to the country and work in elder care. So they very recently announced that they are going to bring in care workers from Indonesia, 100,000 of them. And the fact that Japan is one of the oldest countries in the world is also a contributing factor to the fact that you see so many robotics startups, either commercially available in Japan, like Paro, or experimenting in Japan. It's just not just because they're an older country, but also because the population is open to that. And we look at when we look at Singapore, we see that they're also signing deals to bring in robots and mobility devices into the country to help their aging population. One giant opportunity, if you have access to this market, is China, because when we look at the numbers, they will have the largest number of people over the age of 60. And so traditionally, many of the tech companies in China are owned by the government or affiliated with the government. I'm not saying it's an easy market to access, but if you can, then obviously you have the largest audience in the world and the largest potential user base out of any country. Another very interesting country market that is, we already see startups very successful there, is India. So it is actually the next frontier for AgeTech because you have 1 billion smartphone users, or you will have 1 billion smartphone users pretty soon. You have the 5th largest economy in the world with a GDP of more than $3 trillion. And you have obviously older adults who are contributing to this economy because the longevity economy is strong in India as well. The older adults or people over the age of 50 contribute over $2 trillion to India's economy. And you also have a large number of older adults who are smartphone users. And so you see startups like Get Set Up, which is based both in the US and in India, being very successful in India with millions of users. Startups like Kial raise more than $4 million in seed funding. It's a very significant seed round. And also because they have access to this huge market and they already have over 1 million registered users, which is unheard of for most other countries to have over 1 million registered users when you're still at the very early stages and you're still raising seed funding. And we also have them, there's a concierge service. They offer on-demand assistance, payments, live sessions. It's like an all-encompassing app for India's older adults. So we see these startups doing very well in this market, and any other startup who's looking to expand internationally, if you have access to the Indian market, that is also a very interesting opportunity for you. Another opportunity, as always, is the care crisis. This is nothing new. We know that there is a shortage of millions of care workers globally. We know that elder care organizations are struggling to hire employees and that there is a retention problem. We see that care providers are having to turn away clients because they don't have enough staff. So that is nothing new. It's a huge opportunity, and we see some startups tap into that. One of the most interesting ones that I've seen recently is Caribou Rewards, which basically helps care organizations offer incentives to their staff, hopefully winning over staff and not losing them to their competitors. Another huge opportunity is elder scams and fraud. This is a challenge that is actually quantifiable. We know that in the United States alone, it is billions of dollars that are being lost each and every year due to elder scams and fraud. We know that with the rise of generative AI, scammers are using generative AI to scam older adults and to pretend that they are a grandson or a child in distress and getting people to send them money. That is a huge challenge, and we definitely need more startups addressing that. Older adults who are looking for work is a huge economic opportunity. According to the World Economic Forum, there is a potential $5 trillion in an incremental annual GDP that is untapped by not employing older adults who are looking for work. A report from Harvard Business Review showed us that older adults, people over the age of 65, are the fastest growing segment of the labor force. So people want to continue to work, but it's still an untapped opportunity. And last but not least, supporting family caregivers. According to the World Economic Forum, family caregivers lose about $5 billion in wages each and every year. That is a huge opportunity for startups. And what we've seen in the past year or two is startups who are actually targeting this particular problem. And they're actually helping family caregivers get paid for what used to be unpaid work of a family caregivers. So that is fantastic. More power to these startups. Now, before we dive into Q&A, I want to tell you about some opportunities in summer semester at the AgeTech Academy. So first and foremost, we are going to be hosting a Mastering AgeTech bootcamp on July 16, almost 3 weeks from now. We're going to not just give you a brief overview of the AgeTech landscape and tech solutions, but we're also dive into the role of AI in AgeTech, analyze market trends and opportunities, and look into the future and discuss what you could be building if you're building an AgeTech startup or if you're starting to build an AgeTech startup right about now. And we've got the early bird discount valid for the next 72 hours. And because this is a live cohort course, limited spots are available. So we don't like to have these courses too big because we want to keep it a small, tight-knit group for an overall great experience to all students. You've also got the AgeTech Academy membership Explorer Edition for free for the next 72 hours, and the AgeTech Academy Premium membership at a 20% discount for the next 72 hours. I will pop the links to all of those in the chat box right about now, so you don't miss out on anything, and we'll also email those to you with the recording, hopefully tomorrow. And now I want to open it up for questions. I see a number of you have already posted questions in the chat box. And Neil, do you want to come on stage and help us answer some of those?
All right. Thank you so much for the great presentation again. Every year it's amazing and so exciting to listen to you. I will start with easy questions. Matthew Goldburn asks, how can we share other opportunities for startups and organizations in the innovation space?
How can we share opportunities to other organizations? I'm assuming that you're asking about how to spread the word about this ecosystem. So this is a great question. I feel, and I'm sure most of you also feel, that this ecosystem is hidden in plain sight because there are so many wonderful innovations out there. And we also see startups struggling to make their presence known, especially if they're direct-to-consumer startups. It's really expensive. I feel it's a chicken and an egg thing because we do see the media interested in it, but we also see startups, or we only see startups who have a PR budget, reach those media opportunities and make their presence known on like TV and like these bigger news outlets. So I'm not sure what is the right way to do it, but I feel like it's a joint effort. I feel like we all should be talking about this. And I know everyone is super excited about what you're doing. And I feel like it's everyone's sort of responsibility to spread the word. I hope this answers your question, Matthew.
Thank you, Karen. I will continue with that. And so we have another one. Do you have any insights into acquisition cost for hardware, software solutions in the AgeTech. It's from an anonymous attendee.
So hardware is hard, and we all know that. It really depends on the startup. If you're talking about getting a startup acquired, I don't think there is a set benchmark for any hardware startup for how many dollars or cents these startups get acquired.
Thank you. And we have Stefano on board. He is sharing.
Hi, Stefano.
Thanks. So he has two questions actually. What are your thoughts on AgeTech founders using social media to share about their companies? Is it something you advise to educate the public about what AgeTech is? Also the second question.
So great question, Stefano. First of all, if anyone here is not familiar with Stefano's LinkedIn account or TikTok account, I highly encourage you to follow him on social media because he makes AgeTech educational content that is not only educational, but also highly entertaining. I do think there is a role for social media in educating the public on this. However, what I see, and this is one of the things that we do keep track on when we look at the AgeTech ecosystem and we follow startups year over year, what we see, unfortunately, is that not enough startups have enough presence on social media. I know that this is a matter of, I know that funding is something that you have to really be mindful of, and you don't necessarily have the funding as a startup to have a huge marketing team and to have a dedicated person for social media. However, the cost of production now is lower than it ever was. And I feel like it is doable. It is cheaper now than ever before to have an online social media presence. And I highly encourage everyone watching this to promote your startup on social media, like Stefano is doing.
Awesome. Definitely, he does great work. So the next one we have also from Elizabeth Miller. What do you believe is working or not related to marketing these new solutions?
So it's a great question, Elizabeth. So it really depends who you're marketing to. I feel like startups who are in the direct to consumer space, a lot of the times the social media channels will work very well for them, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever. For B2B startups, LinkedIn is probably a great avenue for promoting your company. We see startups doing really well with webinars similar to this one. We see startups doing really well with like white papers and all sorts of creative means to make your presence known and to create value for potential clients and potential users even before they become your clients and users. I hope this answers your question, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Karen. So the next question is from Mick Fitzgerald. Are there any large tech companies that are trying to innovate in age tech?
Yes. So the most obvious examples would be Apple and Amazon. Apple with their fall detection feature and on the Apple Watch, and also the gait assessment tool on the newer iPhones. And Amazon with their features for Alexa that are designed for family caregivers. I still think that there is plenty of room for innovation from the big tech companies. For example, I would love to see both Google and Apple, who make operating systems for smartphones, I would love to see them tackle scams, right? Phone scams. I would love to see them blacklist known scammers. Make the operating system for everyone's phones. I don't think there's a technological barrier in doing so. I wonder why they don't do it. It's one thing. So I think there's plenty of room for innovation from big tech companies. And I am following the news just as you are to see what big tech companies do next.
Awesome. Let's keep it up then. So the next question is from Shad Singleton. So do you have recommendations finding and involving age tech users? So I know that you have great courses in your age tech academy, and I don't know if you can give a summary quickly here because it's a broad topic to do.
Yes, it is. It is a broad topic. And so to engage with your users, first of all, I think it is incredibly important to, first of all, define who your target user is, who is your ideal user persona, and go find people who match your ideal user persona online. You can do it either using your personal connections. And I don't mean just talking to your parents or grandparents or talking to your parents' friends, reaching out to through these people to people who are strangers. They can be like your initial outreach just to validate that your ideal user persona even exists as you think it exists. That is one phase. And you can also, if you have some budget, you can definitely go to platforms like, I think it's userresearch.com or userinterviews.com, and you can actually define the ideal user persona you want to speak to, and they will find you people to interview. So that's like the most basic thing that I would go and do. And it's also important not to sell your product. Do not come into user interviews trying to sell your solution. Please don't. The first thing you have to do is figure out whether the problem you're trying to solve actually exists and how is it perceived and experienced by the people you're trying to solve it for. That is the top priority when you're just starting out. I hope this answers your question.
Thanks, Karen. So we have another question from Nick Hagen. He says, I would love to hear of more sources for technologies that support the businesses, provide senior care. He is thinking of other startups that might fall under the operations category of your market map.
So this is a good time to tell you all that we have a submission form for AgeTech startups. So if you're a founder of an AgeTech startup, or if you're using a wonderful AgeTech product solution, go to thegerontechnologies.com. We have in a box the link to submit your startup for review. And we go over all of these ambitions. And if they match the inclusion criteria, we will include them in the next versions of the market map. Very roughly speaking, very broadly speaking, the inclusion criteria is to have a technology product that is designed for older adults or those who care for them, to either be a VC-backed company or have a commercially available product, and to be a for-profit entity, not a nonprofit or a research initiative. So go to thegerontechnologies.com and submit your companies. Thank you.
We are looking for your companies to hear more and expand our list definitely. So the next question is from Anil Sanwal. Is supporting aging in place still a standalone opportunity? It seems so for him, as 75-85% of the seniors want to age their own home. What do you think about this, Karen?
So I like to think of aging in place, like the aging in place sort of category is almost an umbrella term, because there are so many startups that could broadly fit into aging in place supporting startups. I think it's, I don't know if I would define it as a standalone opportunity. I think it's a huge opportunity. Startups from like personal wellness startups supporting aging in place, to mobility startups supporting aging in place, to transportation, on-demand transportation startups supporting aging in place. So I think it's a really broad definition that so many startups fall into.
I totally agree, and I can say that my PhD doctoral network is totally working on aging in place. So the next one from is Mark Fanning. To what extent are AgeTech solutions reaching low-income countries, and is this an opportunity? It strikes to him that some infrastructures in these areas will be an issue. What do you think about this, Karen?
So first of all, hi, Mark. It's great to have you here. I think this is a great question. And it's also why I wanted to mention India in this webinar. And we also published an article about it a few weeks ago. So you could say that India is a low-income country. However, it's also a country in which smartphones are ubiquitous. And in many low-income countries, the primary device that people use is their smartphone, which is in their pocket on their body at all times within reach. And yes, you could say that this is a more challenging market for startups, but also you could look at it from the perspective that everyone has access to this handheld magical computer that is connected to the internet. And you could use that to do almost anything today. And that's why you see startups like Kia and Get Set Up be hugely successful in markets like India. And yes, maybe the internet infrastructure is not there, but you can also see that in high income countries like the United States, the internet infrastructure is not there in rural areas. And it's the same in Canada. It's the same in rural parts of Europe. It's the same in rural parts of Australia. And so I don't think low income countries are necessarily a market that you should ignore altogether. Quite the opposite. If you have access to this market, I would definitely look into that.
Thank you, Karen. The next one is from anonymous attendee. It's a nice question that we understand that there's a part of AgeTech that is neither assistive tech or digital, but what exactly does this refers to and how can it be categorized as AgeTech when so many of things in it seems to apply to younger people as well?
So this is a great question. When I talk about the white space in the middle, that is not assistive tech and not digital health, I look at startups addressing lifelong learning and starting your career in your third or fourth act, or just leisure. Some of it could apply for younger people. However, we don't see younger people struggle, or we don't see young people struggle quite as much to get into or to get back into the job market, because the job market doesn't discriminate against young people. We don't see young people struggle to travel the world because they are on a fixed income or because they have mobility difficulties, not quite as much as older adults. And we don't necessarily see young people living in huge homes and needing to rent out a room in their home to get someone to live with them so they won't be lonely, or to get an income stream. So a lot of the challenges, or most of these challenges that these startups are tackling, younger people don't experience them quite as much. And yes, these startups are specifically designed for older adults. And it doesn't mean that younger people don't have the option to enjoy them. If these startups are commercially available, anyone can go on the website and travel the world via Zoom, but it's not as appealing to younger adults. I hope this answers your question.
Thank you, Karen. So there is a lot of ones. So I'm trying to choose the ones that they are fit in our time frame. So it's from Robert Broker. Will you send us something, the bootcamp, to indicate what an attendee will walk away with, expected outcomes, and so on? Do you have any planned event that is coming up?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking this, Robert. We will email you with all the details as soon as we have the recording for the webinar ready, probably tomorrow. And it's great to have you here, Bob.
That's great.
And before I forget, if any of you have any questions that we won't have time to answer today because we only have 5 more minutes left, we quietly launched a new Pick My Brain segment at the Gerontechnologist. So if you head over to thegerontechnologist.com, at the top menu, there is a Pick My Brain link where you can submit your questions, and we will make an effort to reply to them, and we'll also publish the best ones online on the website.
Looking forward to that. And we have one from Tom Adler. He sends greetings, and his question is like, how can we become more inclusive in the AgeTech in terms of those who are aging and living with a disability?
Tom, this is a great question. Hi, Tom. Great to see you. It's a great question. I feel, generally speaking, in our society, we have a long way to go to be an inclusive society towards older people and towards people living with a disability. Within the AgeTech ecosystem, I do feel like people and startups are making an effort. And I feel like most startups today understand the importance of user-centric design and including our every stakeholder basically in the design process. However, due to the scarcity of resources, not everyone is doing as great as they would have liked to be doing. But I feel like generally as an ecosystem, the AgeTech ecosystem is a step ahead of society in general. Let me know in the chat box if you disagree with what I just said. I'm curious.
Let's see, I'm curious as well. So we have another question from anonymous attendee. So how do we increase insurance coverage for age-tech products and services that support independence of an older adult?
Great question. I feel like insurance companies in general want to include AgeTech products as part of their offerings or benefit that they offer policyholders. However, the type of industry that is the insurance industry is a slow industry. Any startup who's selling into this industry should expect a long sales cycle. I think the great thing that I do see is that some of the largest insurance companies in the world have like innovation departments, and they're actively looking for solutions, AgeTech solutions. They're actively piloting AgeTech startups with the hopes of distributing their solutions to their policyholders. And yes, Jill is commenting that insurance for SaaS products is enormously difficult to find. Yes, it's a challenging industry, but it's a huge industry. And we do see insurtech startups doing really well, actually, because in some cases, it's more straightforward. The ROI is more straightforward. Hey, you had this policyholder, you could have paid them this amount of money to cover whatever. With my technology, you only had to pay them X minus something. I did great. We got ROI. Now implement my technology for everyone. So it's a difficult industry, but also in some cases, it's more straightforward to show our ROI than for other types of use cases for AgeTech. We only have 1 minute left, and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So, Neil, do you have one more question that we can take today?
There is no short question. All of them are really long and intense answers. So I would advise if you miss them and if you can submit via form, we will be delightful to send you the response.
Yes, that would be great. Head over to thegerontechnologist.com and find the Pick My Brain link and send us your questions. We'll be happy to answer them. That is a wrap. Thank you all for joining live for the State of AgeTech 2024 webinar. We will email you the recording once it's processed, as well as all of our offerings from the AgeTech Academy, valid for the next 72 hours only. I'm Karen Etkin. My lovely co-host is Neil Morale, and thank you all for joining. We'll see you on the next webinar. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.